Debate. Reprise de débat. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Science and Sport and to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement and Accessibility.
Yeah, it's getting a little long. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Thank you for this opportunity to speak about the measures our government is taking to make Canada a more inclusive and accessible society for all Canadians. The word inclusion tends to be overused, but for us it has a specific meaning. It means making efforts to support people who face obstacles when they try to participate fully in society. Of course, this primarily affects people with disabilities. Madam Speaker, I am very proud to see Bill C-81 being tabled in this House. The Act to ensure a barrier-free Canada responds to real needs for many Canadians. The numbers are troubling. Only 49% of Canadians with disabilities aged 25 to 64 have a job, and that's compared with 79% of Canadians without a disability. They earn 44% less than Canadians without a disability and are more susceptible to poverty. We can all agree, I'm sure, that this is unacceptable, and that is why we are acting so resolutely. As we were preparing our plan to create accessibility legislation, we knew we would need to listen to Canadians who really have this topic at heart. So we held the largest consultation on this topic in the history of Canada. We met with more than 6,000 people and over 90 organizations. By listening to Canadians throughout this consultation, we learned about the real issues surrounding accessibility in our country. These consultations guided the preparation of the bill that is before the House today. I would like to start by noting that if it is passed, the bill will apply to organizations under federal jurisdiction. This includes Parliament, the Government of Canada, and Crown corporations, as well as the federally regulated private sector. This last group includes organizations in the transportation sector, the broadcasting and telecommunications sector, and the banking and financial sector. One of the priority areas of the bill is the development and implementation of new accessibility standards. Bill C-81 proposes to create the Canadian Accessibility Standards Development Organization. This innovative organization, the first of its kind in Canada, would have the mandate to develop model accessibility standards that would guide the requirements that organizations under federal jurisdiction must respect to identify and eliminate obstacles and to prevent the creation of any new obstacles. The Canadian Accessibility Standards Development Organization would give people with disabilities a voice in the development of accessibility standards that affect them directly. As a result, the Board of Directors would be made up of a majority of people with disabilities. Madam Speaker, we are fully aware that accessibility will not happen overnight when this bill is passed. Passing bills is not enough to change mentalities and implement solutions. That is why we are determined to collaborate with all Government of Canada organizations to produce results that will make the implementation of accessibility practical and possible for everyone. Our approach is simple. We want to lead the way and be leaders in accessibility in this country. Everyone in this House has their own personal story about people with disabilities, whether it's a loved one, a friend, a colleague. We are all affected. Accessibility issues affected me personally when my mother suffered a major stroke when she was 69 years old. We were told she wouldn't survive the night, but doctors didn't know my mother. She was a fighter and survived for 13 years, but not without major challenges. For the rest of her life, my mother navigated the world in a wheelchair. It wasn't easy, and my dad worked extremely hard trying to make life a little easier for both of them. That was in the early 90s. I'm concerned that barriers still exist, and we need to move forward as a government and as a federal government, become leaders in this field. Watching my parents was very eye-opening. My dad even designed his own contraption to help him load my mother's wheelchair in and out of their car trunk because it was far too heavy for him to lift. He would map out the day trying to determine if they could go to the mall and find a washroom on a moment's notice. This was 25 years ago, and so accessible washrooms were not the norm. And even if they were, my dad wasn't always allowed into the ladies' room to help my mother get on and off the toilet. It robbed them both of their dignity. These are very personal, very natural part of everyone's life, but not if you're disabled. The simplest thing can become daunting and keep people with disabilities from feeling welcomed in society. While my mom and dad were trying their best to stay active despite my mother's disabilities, my young daughter was struggling in school. As the early grades went by, we realized she was having great difficulty and finally was diagnosed with profound learning disabilities. At that time, I was the news anchor for the television station in London. My job was reading the news every night to thousands of people. Ironically, my daughter was having an almost impossible time trying to learn to read. I'll never forget the day when Lauren was in grade 6 and the school called a meeting with me and her dad. They told us they didn't know how Lauren learned, but they couldn't teach her, and they suggested we find another school for her to attend. We were devastated. How could a public school, how could her teachers give up on her? We were told Lauren would never read for pleasure, something her dad and I enjoyed doing so much. We worried about how these challenges would limit her future job prospects and what type of job she could do when she finished school. Parents of children with learning disabilities need to constantly advocate for their own children to make sure they get the support they need. As a country, we need to support these young people early so that they can become happy, healthy young people who have jobs to look forward to. As for Lauren, getting her into a special needs class was the turning point and really helped her find her way. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and today Lauren does read for pleasure. She turns 30 in a couple of days, and she's now giving me suggestions for books that I should read. So we all have our personal stories of people in our lives who are in some way disabled or differently abled, as I like to say. Everyone needs the support, and we will all benefit from a more accessible Canada. When the most challenged in our society are given a chance to succeed, we all succeed. Madam Speaker, as you know, the Government of Canada is the largest purchaser of goods and services in the country, as well as the largest employer in Canada. Moreover, organizations under federal jurisdiction represent a large portion of public space in the country and employ nearly 1 million Canadians. We believe that these organizations can have a major impact on the culture change concerning accessibility. In addition to Bill C-81, the Government of Canada will invest in a Procurement Accessibility Resource Centre. We will also adjust policies to ensure that the products and services purchased by the Government of Canada are accessible. We hope that our leadership will encourage organizations all across the country to join the movement and be proactive for accessibility. People with disabilities who are successful in the workplace are in the minority, and that shouldn't be the case. Many businesses are starting to come to the realization that hiring people with disabilities isn't just the right thing to do, it's good for business. 15 years ago, I was part of a group of London business people who started the Ability First Coalition to encourage employers to hire and retain people with disabilities. I put the emphasis on retain because too often people with disabilities will start a job but find it, for whatever reason, too challenging, maybe because of a lack of appropriate training. Or maybe they needed some type of accommodation that the employer wasn't willing to consider. There can be many reasons, but businesses that have had success will tell you that their business is richer and more rewarding for all employees when there are people with disabilities working and getting paid just like everyone else. Improving accessibility is good for business. Employment and Social Development Canada estimates suggest that fully including and accommodating people with disabilities in the workplace could produce economic benefits reaching between 1.3% to 1.9% of GDP, or $26.4 to $38.5 billion annually. That's astonishing. A similar recent study by the Conference Board of Canada, which looked only at physical accessibility, also shows that making workplaces accessible would have a significant impact on economic growth. We have to remove barriers to success, and this is exactly what this accessibility or Accessible Canada legislation does. Really, what we are looking for is a culture change. We will lead by example and become a global model for accessibility. This bill represents a real transformation in the Government of Canada's approach to accessibility. Up to this point, any action for accessibility was up to those affected. It was up to them to take the initiative and file complaints with authorities about systematically inaccessible processes with the hope that it would lead to results. This is now changing with this bill. It will no longer be up to Canadians with disabilities to fix the system. We want to ensure that barriers are eliminated before they become problems. And we are doing this through new measures for compliance with and application of the bill. As a result, organizations under federal jurisdiction will now be responsible for the implementation and equality of accessible practices. In 2012, almost 3.8 million, or about 14% of Canadians aged 15 years and older, reported being limited in their daily activities due to a disability. This percentage is expected to increase with population aging, since the prevalence of disability increases with age. The barriers faced by Canadians with disabilities today are real and tangible. Every day, barriers prevent Canadians with disabilities from being able to access necessary services and buildings, and barriers continue to impact the participation of people with disabilities across all aspects of work, family, and community life. If passed by Parliament, Bill C-81 would benefit all Canadians, especially Canadians with disability, by helping create a barrier-free Canada. This bill proposes proactive compliance activities, such as inspections, document audits, and a series of tools, including compliance orders and warnings, compliance audits, and fines. I should specify here that this does not take away people's right to file complaints and receive compensation if they are victims of prejudice because an organization does not respect its new obligations under the bill and regulations. Madam Speaker, it is a combination of all these measures that will lead to real change in accessibility in Canada. The goal of this bill is to eliminate barriers and provide more access and possibilities for all people with disabilities. We still have a lot of work to do to create a Canada that is truly accessible and inclusive. But I am confident together, if we support Bill C-81, we will be taking another step in the right direction. There's something else that's happening today on Parliament Hill that I wanted to make everyone aware of. The first ever United Nations International Day of Sign Languages was celebrated yesterday, and it coincides with International Week of the Deaf. The theme for this year is With sign language, everyone is included. It emphasizes the importance of recognizing sign language as a principal means of communication in today's world. And later today, we're going to have a reception and hear more from people. And I'm actually going to have a chance to have my first lesson in sign language, which I'm looking forward to. Our government is committed to ensuring that greater accessibility and opportunities for all Canadians with disabilities, and that includes Canadians who are deaf. This year, as we have today, tabling this legislation will remove and prevent barriers to accessibility. Canada is at its best when everyone is included, and I encourage all members in this House to join me today in recognizing and celebrating the contributions made to Canadian society by people who are deaf. Some of the highlights that our government has committed to and has done over the past will tell you that we're on the right track, but it's only a beginning. Our government has taken leadership on the access to alternative format materials for persons with a disability through the accession of the Marrakesh Treaty in 2016, an investment to date of over $6 million for the production of alternative format materials. We recognize the importance of supporting the removal of barriers in the built environment, and we announced in 2017 an increase of $77 million over 10 years to expand the activities of the Enabling Accessibility Fund. This fund, with an annual budget of $22 million, supports the capital costs of construction and renovation related to improving physical accessibility and safety for people with disabilities. In April 2018, our government made changes to immigration's medical inadmissibility policy to strike a balance between protecting publicly funded health and social services and bringing it in line with our current views on the inclusion of persons with disabilities. And through the historic new investments in the Investing in Canada plan, all federally funded public-facing infrastructure will be required to meet the highest published applicable accessibility standard in a respective jurisdiction. And also the National Housing Strategy will ensure that a minimum of 20% of new construction and repaired units must meet accessibility standards, and for all projects must be designed barrier-free. This strategy also includes a commitment of 2,400 affordable housing units built for persons with developmental disabilities. The one thing we take from all of this, Madam Speaker, is that disabilities means so very much to so many different people. My grandsons were born very prematurely, and they only weighed less than 2 pounds at birth. We were very concerned about what would happen to them as they grew up. I'm so happy to say that they both, twin boys, turned 6 years old in a couple of days. And you know, you don't even know that they were born prematurely. The only evidence is the fact that their eyesight isn't as good as maybe it should be, and so they both wear glasses. We were worried that Harrison was going to be legally blind, and we waited patiently to find out what his abilities would be. And through the years, every year, it seems to be getting better. But it's going to be a while before we know, as parents, as grandparents, whether Harrison will need accommodations in his school life. But I hope and I pray that with this Accessible Canada legislation, we are moving in the right direction so that people like Harrison, my grandson, Lauren, my daughter, and my mother, who is in heaven, I know, will all realize that we're working in the right direction to make Canada a more accessible place for all. Thank you, Madam Speaker.